So I'm set to start my next project. I have all of the wood cut for it, ripped to width and length and the amount that I think I'm going to need. I actually made a drawing of the pattern here, and then on top of that I actually went and made up a spreadsheet of all the pieces that I need, the width, the segment width, and a layer diameter that they're going to be, what row numbers there are. So it's going to have 15 rows, and I still haven't figured exactly what I'm going to do with the bottom one yet. I might put a solid bottom on it, or I might do a segmented floating bottom, or I might do a segmented bottom with some resin in it. I haven't decided that yet, but right now I'm going to start cutting all these out on the wedgie sled over there. You've seen me cut these out on the wedgie sled before, so I'll do a few of them and show you, but I'm not going to show you everything I cut. So I'm going to have at it, get everything cut, and be back in a few. Now, using my spreadsheet here, I was able to cut all of my pieces, and what I do is I throw them in a bag and label it each row, so that when I'm working on row 1, I will grab the bag that is row 1, which is probably down here someplace, I would imagine. Yes, there it is right there. Row 1, which in this case happens to be all maple, like this row here. Row 11 has some yellow heart, purple heart, maple, and some walnut. So each row has the appropriate number pieces and the color of the wood. From there, I use my design grid here, and that will tell me what number each brick is, each segment piece is, I should say, and I will put that in this number here, and I'll always make sure that this number lines up with the one that's the number 1 piece that was before it, that was prior to it. So that way it keeps my pattern in sequence all the way through. So before I start gluing these up, I need to make a bottom. And what I did was I decided to use some Wingay, and I used it to make this little design, cut it so that it makes this little design in the center here. And I'm just going to use some resin to fill that in. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go with the same color, like a black color resin, or if I'm going to change the resin to like a yellow or a purple to match the purple heart. I haven't quite figured that one out yet, but I'm sure that will happen soon. So I'm gonna glue that up first. I also made the top out of Wingay. So both the bottom and top are Wingay, and then they have a single layer of maple before it starts the pattern, both from the top and bottom. This particular one, I'm gonna glue up, and I'll take it on the bandsaw and cut it in half, and then sort of, twist it a little bit so that the seams don't line up, and that way it's gonna make for a stronger piece on top. So right now, I'm gonna go ahead and glue up my base so I get that going, because I need the base to put on the lathe so I can start working on everything. And that's where we're gonna head over to right now, gluing that up. Now the upper ring, that is a 24 segment piece, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull all those pieces in. The idea is to get it in the right order. Now I've already placed them in the order they're supposed to be, and I'm gonna make some adjustments. I'm going to start lining them up in a row. That seems to me to be the quickest way. I made that little stick just so I could put them across there. And then I could spread the glue across there. I start building the one row that is the length of the stick that I can put together, which is about 18 of them. And then the other row I put on the second. So you can see I'm gluing it up. I always get in a rush and get worried. And even though I'm using the extended glue means that it has more open time. But once they go together and the end grain starts sucking that wood dry, and that gap is rather small, they do bind up, they do start locking in pretty quick. So it has to be a fast process. Now once I'm done, I put one rubber band around, and the rubber band doesn't have to have a ton of pressure. People think, I do use the hose clamps, and they do put a lot of pressure, but you don't have to have a lot of pressure on these. You just need to have them, the gaps closed. But the more and more rubber bands I put on, the more pressure it is. Then finally I just wipe it off clean to make sure that everything is good, and it's all good to go. So I begin my glue up by separating all the pieces, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the edge and spread it around with my finger. Now I'm using this Titebond right there, and that's Titebond extended, by the way, so it gives me a little bit more time, although 12 pieces don't need all that much time. And once I have them all in place, I'm going to tighten down the band clamp, which is what I'm doing there. And then I'm using pipe cleaners to clean out the inside there, because I'm going to fill that in with a resin. So once I get it all smooth and level, use that, let it dry up for about an hour or so, and then I could probably pour my resin after that. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm adding the epoxy to the center of my cutout. Now, first thing I need to do is tape it all up to make sure that it doesn't leak through. Then after I feel like I got a good secure taping, and you notice I'm doing the edges too, because I had a couple gaps there when the pieces went together. They didn't quite go together all the way. So I tape that up so that I can drop the epoxy down in there and seal that up too. Now I have the epoxy already set out, 1-to-1 mixture, and I'm mixing it up here right now. And I got to mix it about a minute. And then I'm going to add some black pearl coloring to it. And so you want to come up here, Tiger, Lacey, come on over here. So I'm adding my black pearl to that and that mixture. And now I'm going to add it to the inside, and then I'm going to work on those edges out there. Now I'm banging it around a little bit just to try and get out the bubbles, and that's the idea there. But yes, thank you. And now, oh, where'd I go? Oh, there. So I went and got my heat gun, and now I'm going to use the heat gun to apply heat, and that's also going to help remove the air bubbles that are inside the epoxy resin. And that's pretty much it. I just keep tabs on it for a little while, let it dry till tomorrow. I'll put it up on the lathe, round it all off, flatten up to one side, and then I can start my glue up. Yes, that's exciting stuff, isn't it? I know. Anyway, that's what I'm doing now. Just, check up the next thing. Okay, so on both my top and bottom ring here, I've flattened them. I've ran them through the drum sander and flattened both sides. And now I'm using the compass to mark the center. So 3 different marks there where they're passed across. That's pretty much the center. And then from there, I make one line, and then I make another line 90 degrees to that, and it gives me my crosshairs. And I take that 2-inch piece and I line up each corner with the crosshairs and glue that down. And that'll be my base for my open segment bowl, which I will be starting very soon. All right, there really is no way around it. You have to sand. Each piece has to get a little bit of sanding. I mean, you just can't avoid that. But one thing you want to do is, if you're using different colors like I am here, I have basically bloodwood, purple heart, walnut, yellow heart, and maple. Now the maple and yellow heart I sand on a different part of the sanding block on the paper, because the purple heart and the bloodwood is going to leave a dark residue on there. And if you go over that with the maple, what you're going to do is you're going to sand some red into the maple or some purple into the maple. So the maple and yellow heart you want to keep away. I generally try to put each piece in a separate part of the sandpaper so I don't have any color crossover later on when I'm finishing up the piece. You might notice a little bit of that. Once that's all done, I start putting the pieces into the Seg Easy plate. Now, I match the numbers on the Seg Easy plate with the numbers that are outlined on my drawing there to make sure that all those pieces are in the right spot. And when I take it on over to the lathe and I push it up against the other pieces, I will make sure that the pattern is appropriately being continued. So let's go on over to the lathe and check that out. So the first thing I'm gonna do is line up and make sure that my pattern is correct and everything is lining up correctly. And I'll rotate it around, double check. Now, I line up space number 1 with number 1 on the previous tile there. And it actually goes in between number 1. What I use for lining up is I actually use the space in between to line up with the space in between on the previous set of rows there. And that sort of helps you line up everything precise. If you just try to line it up using the pieces, they can get off a little bit. So I found that using the space between the pieces is the best way to line them up with the previous pieces that are on there. Now, the glue can be spread all the way across, and I've seen people put on each edge, because really it's a third on each side of the piece that actually touches or makes contact. But I just go ahead and I just glue all the way across the piece and then clean it off later on, which you'll see. I'm putting a line across here. The pencil line is to give me a stopping point for the glue. Now when I'm applying the glue, I use an acid brush, and I'm using Titebond Extended. And the Extended, while it gives more open time, the minute they touch each other, they only have to be together for like 10-15 seconds, and they got a pretty good bond. So if you try to pull them apart, it's rather difficult. You have to start all over. So I want to line it up perfect. Push it together, make sure that's tight. Once everything is tightened down and pushed together, I'm going to go back through each space with a pipe cleaner that has been soaking in water. I'm going to squeeze out the water so the pipe cleaner is damp, it's not dripping wet. And I'm going to go in between each space, both top and bottom, on each segment, and clean out that excess glue that's there. Now, the nice thing about that is when you have that glue there is that it sort of gives it a little bit of a finish right away, you know, sort of gives it a little bit of protection on that wood, because it's going to be real hard to get, even when you're spraying, to get the finish in there. So I don't mind doing that. And you just go through each and every one with the pipe cleaner, clean them all up. Once that's done, you pretty much just leave it there for about 15 minutes, and then you can pull it apart and start on the next segment. During this time, I'll probably go over there and start sanding all the pieces again for the next row to get them ready. So by the time I'm done sanding that, this is ready to come apart and glue on another segment. And that's pretty much what I do this entire process as I add each layer onto the next one. Okay, so my bowl is almost finished. I'm putting on the final ring, which is the top ring, and that's going to be a solid closed segment ring. And that's a 24 segment ring, so that matches up with the 24 open segments. Now I'm using the cold jaws to line up this one, and I'm adjusting around there just to line it up. Once I find the spot that I want, I mark it the same way that I mark the rest of them. And I want to make sure that the seams on the top ring line up with the middle of my pieces, my segment pieces on the open segment part, and that's going to give me a nice solid connection. I apply glue to all the segments and then use the tailstock to add pressure. I'm probably going to keep this one closed for about half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. You know, I'll go find something else to do for a little while. And then once this is done, this bowl is ready to turn both the inside and outside. And again, I'm using pipe cleaners to clean up all the glue that's spills out from the in between the open segment part of the ring. Other than that, this thing is glued up and ready to turn. Okay, well, sometimes you put a lot of work into something and then you hit a catch and takes it out. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. I caught a catch and busted this thing up pretty good. So I'll see if I can repair it, but if not, this video is probably going to end right here. Okay, so as you can see, sometimes things don't quite work out the way that you plan them. I got a big catch on this using my carbide tip tool, so I'm done using those. I seem to have less catches with my regular cutting tools. So, but I thought it'd be a good idea to use on this just to get it to shape, and it sort of launched this off the lathe into my driveway. So I generally do this early in the morning, so it's not the best way to start out a day, but there are actually 3 ways to look at this. You know, you can get all pissed off and just have it destroy your whole day. You can come back and say, okay, well, you know, chalk it up as a learning experience and start working on a new one, and, you know, use this for fancy firewood. But the third way that I'm going to go with is make a design change. I started gluing this back up, and I just realized that there's so many segments in here that are cracked and fractured that it's just not going to glue up, and I don't think it's going to make it and hold together as a open segment piece. So I think in that case I'm going to have to start over. But this is not dead yet, and I have an idea. I think I'm going to try out, and I'm going to film that process. I'm sorry, I had the camera, I turned the camera off for a brief second when I was turning, and then I started turning again and concentrating on the bowl. I forgot to turn the camera back on, so you didn't get to see the launch. I thought I had it on video, but I didn't. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this into a different type of bowl, and that's going to be in part 2 of this video series now of my my exploding bowl. That's what I'm going to call it. Stay tuned. Be back with a video on this bowl if everything works out. You'll see what I've done.